Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another episode of In the Frame. Now this video is probably going to take a little while, so get comfy or watch it in 3 bits, or just give up halfway, it's entirely up to you. And I'm going to talk about the westerns in my collection, rather than trying to do a top 10 or a top 20 westerns, which is quite impossible. I'm just going to go through the westerns that I have in my collection, which is only about 90 odd, and I'll just give a brief synopsis and why it's worth your time checking them out. The western is probably one of the few genres that's typically American, even though obviously there's some Italian exceptions that are greater than American films. Again, you can leave a list below what you think of the ones that I bring up and which classic westerns I'm missing. I'll do a disclaimer right off the bat that I have no John Wayne westerns, which means no Searchers, no Rio Bravo, which also means I don't have a lot of John Ford films. It's just because I really can't stand John Wayne. So sadly, John Ford has to pay the price for that. So I'll make that disclaimer before you start go, oh, you've got to have the Searchers or you've got to have Rio Bravo. They're good films, but they're just not to my taste. Everybody's taste is different. So I'm going to start with a pile that I've either in my backlog or I need to rewatch because I haven't seen them for years. So the first one is Peckinpah's The Ballad of Cable Hogue, starring Jason Robards, from 1970. This is a new premiere edition, which has actually got a commentary with Nick Redman, Paul Seydoux, Garner Simmons and David Weddell. So that's 4 voices in the commentary track. I saw this years ago, but I can't really comment because I need to rewatch it. Next is Sergio Corbucci's The Specialists, which is a relatively new Eureka release. This was made the year after he did The Great Silence, and again I still haven't got around to watching it. Please let me know in the comments below what you think of it. The next one is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in the Steelbook, which again I haven't watched for years, but I picked it up really cheaply on Steelbook, so that's why I have it. Obviously famous for a song, which is never a good look for a film, and obviously the ending. There will be some that aren't strictly westerns, but pretty much are. They're just in different genres, but they're essentially westerns. So next up is Badlands, which isn't a traditional western of Terrence Malick, but it's pretty much a western. Again, I need to rewatch that. It's been a while. Next is Jeremiah Johnson, directed by Sidney Pollack, from 1972, starring Robert Redford. Again, I haven't seen that one for a while. McCabe and Mrs. Miller by Robert Altman. This is Altman doing a western, which is obviously a bit different. Again, I haven't seen this for years, so I'm not really going to comment extensively on that one. You can all tell me in the comments how great it is. Next is 2 box sets, which sadly I still haven't got around to watching. So this is Arrow's Complete Sartana. I mean, the titles alone are fantastic. Have a Good Funeral, My Friend, Sartana Will Pay. Light the Fuse, Sartana is Coming. Sartana's Here, Trade Your Pistol for a Coffin. I Am Sartana, Your Angel of Death. And If You Meet Sartana, Pray for Your Death. And the other box set that's still in my backlog is The Indicator, Five Tall Tales with Bud Bodecker and Randolph Scott, which is a tall tea, Decision at Sundown, Buchanan Rides Alone, Ride Lonesome, and Comanche Station, which is really beautiful artwork, but again, I still haven't got around to watching it. So the ones that I have seen, I can comment briefly on. This is a John Ford film, but there's no John Wayne. This is Two Rode Together from 1961, starring Jimmy Stewart, who obviously did a lot of classic westerns, and Richard Widmark. This is a wonderful little film. Next, just in case the pile falls over, is an Anthony Mann, Jimmy Stewart western, The Man from Laramie. Anthony Mann and Jimmy Stewart had a really good relationship. They did 5 westerns. And this was post-war Jimmy Stewart, so he was a bit darker in these films. This one, he's obsessed with finding the killer of his brother, and he rocks up in a ranch, and it could be one of 3 people. I mean, westerns generally have fairly basic stories, but it's generally the psychology and the characters that kind of make some more interesting than others. Because people do say, oh well, westerns are all the same. They're not quite all the same. Next, go through a pile that are DVD only. This is Death Rides a Horse with Lee Van Cleef from 1967. Lee Van Cleef's always fun. Next is another Anthony Mann, Jimmy Stewart, The Naked Spur with Robert Ryan and Janet Leigh. Again, Jimmy Stewart is really driven as a bounty hunter, bringing back Robert Ryan. Again, we'll see other Anthony Mann films have got Blu-ray releases, but The Naked Spur could really do with a Blu-ray release. Next is One False Move by Carol Franklin in 1991. Not a western, but it's pretty much a western about bank robbers criminals who rip off drug dealers and murder them in fairly nasty ways at the start of the film, and then they come out to the rural country and they're coming through Bill Paxton's town. It's essentially a western, but it's set in modern day. That really needs a Blu-ray because it's really one of the best American films in the 90s. Next is Blood on the Moon, directed by Robert Wise, starring Robert Mitchum. About a hired gun in between cattle barons and ordinary farmers. Next is Backlash with Richard Widmark. He's on the hunt for somebody who survived an Indian massacre and perhaps escaped with gold. And he meets a woman who's on a similar path. Next is Robert Mitchum again with Man with the Gun, which is about hired guns who solve town disputes, but perhaps cause more trouble than they're worth after the dispute's settled. Obviously influenced by samurai films a little bit. Next is The Tin Star with Henry Fonda and Anthony Perkins. An unusual performance by Anthony Perkins as a sheriff who doesn't really know what he's doing, so he enlists the help of Henry Fonda, who's a grizzled veteran. It's a great little Anthony Mann film. I think it was supposed to be Jimmy Stewart instead of Henry Fonda, but Jimmy Stewart was busy or couldn't do it. Again, another film that deserves a Blu-ray because it's really quite fantastic. The relationship between the two is just wonderful. Next is Lawman with Burt Lancaster, directed by Michael Winner from 1970, I believe. It's a solid little western. Burt Lancaster's always watchable. Next, it's Kirk Douglas's turn with Last Train from Gun Hill with Anthony Quinn. Again, Kirk Douglas is on the trail of the men who raped and murdered his wife, and Anthony Quinn is the leader of a family or a gang, one of which did the crime. So it's just a great cat and mouse between Kirk Douglas and Anthony Quinn. Next is another film that really deserves an upgrade. It's The Fastest Gun Alive with Glenn Ford. Glenn Ford stars as a man with a secret past, because he was the fastest gun alive, and criminals turn up at their town, and a little boy tells the lead criminal that, you know, there's a man in town that's the fastest gun alive. Obviously the criminal wants to meet him in order for a duel. It's a great wee film. Glenn Ford really brings a lot of angst, because he wants to obviously stay away from guns. You can probably guess how it ends, but it's a great wee film. Next is Silver Load, which is a fantastic Dan Duryea film about a man who, on his wedding day, Dan Duryea turns up with a group of bounty hunters saying that he's got to take him back because he killed somebody in another town. Fantastic little film. Dan Duryea is always worth money. Next is Grim Prairie Tales, which is an anthology horror set in the West, with Brad Dourif and James Earl Jones, who are the two characters in the Framing episodes, as two guys who meet and trade scary stories with each other. It's a fun little film. Next is Sabata with Lee Van Cleef, who, I'm not sure how many Sabatas. There's certainly Return of the Sabata. This is 1969. It's a solid little film. It's Lee Van Cleef. Next, it's Kirk Douglas again, Man Without a Star, which is an excellent little western about a guy, again, who doesn't like boundaries, who wants the idea of freedom. We'll get to another film with Kirk Douglas about that as well. It's a great little western, which again deserves an upgrade. Next is one I've only got a copy on a DVD. This is Fire Creek from 1968, starring James Stewart and Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda actually playing a baddie in 1968. Sounds familiar. Again, probably should be better than it actually is, but it's a solid little western. Next is Ozana's Raid with Burt Lancaster, which is a really gritty 70s western, which you can get in Blu-ray, which at some point I will upgrade. Next, we'll actually get to some Blu-rays. Lone Ranger by Gore Verbinski, which got just lots of abuse when it came out, because it was darker than people were expecting it to be. Obviously people were upset because Johnny Depp was playing a Native American. Like I said, it's about the genocide of the Native Americans. It's got a nice little homage to Once Upon a Time in the West running through it. It's a lot better than people give it credit for, and it's a lot darker than what people were expecting. Next is another modern film, which is pretty much a western. It's Tommy Lee Jones' Three Burials of Melquiades Estrada, which I can never pronounce properly. It's a really beautiful film. Tommy Lee Jones, who you can kind of take or leave sometimes. It was beautiful direction, shown flashback, and it's really fantastic about his friend who gets... Well, I won't give away the plot, just go and watch it, because it is a really fantastic modern film. Yes, there are fantastic modern films, believe it or not. Here's another one, Bone Tomahawk with Kurt Russell. This starts off as a communal garden western and then takes a bit of a left turn and quickly gets very much darker very, very quickly. It's got a great cast. Matthew Fox and Richard Jenkins, Patrick Wilson. It is an 18 and it's an 18 for a reason. But for not a huge budget, it's a really well made little genre film. Next is The Bravados, which I think I've done a random review of. Gregory Peck. About again a man looking to find the men who killed his wife. So he tracks down Lee Van Cleef and Stephen Boyd, and Henry Silva is fantastic in this as well. And he eventually finds out the truth. Joan Collins turns up almost from a completely different film. This is a German Blu-ray. It's one of my favourite westerns. Gregory Peck's fantastic, and yeah, won't give away the ending, but it's fantastic. Next is No Name on the Bullet with Audie Murphy. Again, I did a random review of this. It's a really interesting little film with Audie Murphy as a gunslinger. He's really dark in this film, and it's a really strange little western, directed by Jack Arnold, who is more famous for doing the Incredible Shrinking People films. Next is Lonely Are the Brave, this is a German media book, but it's coming out on Kino Lorber Blu-ray, and I would urge you to pick it up. This is Kirk Douglas, Walter Matthau, Gina Rowlands. As this is an end of an era western, it's pretty much set in the 50s, but Kirk Douglas still rides a horse, still has that freedom mentality, and of course society doesn't actually like that. It's a really nice performance with Gina Rowlands and Walter Matthau as the sheriff who's hunting him down. It's a really sad film, but it's also really truthful. Next is Valley of the Guanji, which technically isn't a western, but it's cowboys versus dinosaurs, and who can resist that? Special effects by Ray Harryhausen, who can resist that? It's just a lot of fun, and it takes you back to your youth. Next, it's John Carpenter's Vampires, which will not take you back to your youth. John Carpenter pretty much stated this is a western, so that's why I've put this in the list. Starring James Woods. It's not very good. Moving on to something that is very good, The Gunfighter, which again I've just done a random review of quite recently, and Criterion announced that it's coming to Criterion, which is awesome, because again it took me ages to get this German Blu-ray, or Die Scharfschütze. It's just a wonderful little Henry King western. Doesn't take that long, it's only 85 minutes. Gregory Peck is an ageing gunfighter with the fastest gun in the West label, and he's just tired of people coming after him, wanting to prove themselves and wanting to kill the fastest gun alive. He comes to this town wanting to find his wife, who lives in anonymity, and his kid one last time, because he wants to settle down, but obviously events don't let him. It's just a beautiful little film, and I'm really excited that it's coming to Criterion Blu-ray. I don't know whether it's just Region A only, or whether it's going to get a Region B release too, but it's a great little western. It's one of my favourites. Next again is a modern western. This is Jim Jarmusch, Dead Man. again, it's Jarmusch, so it's a western, but it's Jarmusch western, and it's absolutely fantastic. Stars Johnny Depp, but it's got a ridiculous cast. Gary Farmer plays a Native American called Nobody, who helps William Blake out because he keeps thinking that Johnny Depp's character is actually the poet William Blake. There's an amazing cast. Lance Henriksen, Michael Wincott, Gabriel Byrne, Crispin Glover, Billy Bob Thornton, Alfred Molina, Iggy Pop, Robert Mitchum in one of his last performances, if not his last performance, Jared Harris, John Hurt's in it. I mean, it's a ridiculous cast. It's shot in black and white. It's just absolutely gorgeous. Again, it's Jarmusch, so it has a particular pace to it. If you're not familiar with his work, it might be a little bit slow, but again, it's kind of trance-like and meditative, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful film. Next is Sergio Leone's Fistful of Dollars. Probably my least favourite Leone film for obvious reasons, but it's still rather good. It's got an awesome Ennio Morricone soundtrack, but for me the other two films in the trilogy are way better. Next, again, a western that's not really a western, but it's a kind of western. It's Kim Ji-woon's The Good, the Bad and the Weird, which is just so much fun. We star Song Kang-ho and Lee Byung, and it's just Lee Byung-hun, sorry. It's just an absolute blast. It's a little bit overlong, but I mean, you can pick this Blu-ray up for like £3 or £4. It's just such a blast. I can't think of the film that it's a homage to. But next, again, it's not a western, but it's pretty much a western. Shane Meadows' Dead Man's Shoes, about Paddy Considine coming back to a small Yorkshire town to wreak revenge on his brother's tormentors. It's just a great wee film. Again, it doesn't hang about, it's rough around the edges, but again, it's not strictly a western, but it's a western. Next up is Tarantino's Hateful Eight, which the box claims it's a masterpiece, which obviously it's not. Again, it's about 90 minutes too long, but there's some good stuff in it. Great ensemble cast. Next is Sergio Corbucci's Django. Again, probably his most famous film, but if you've just watched my favourite 150 films part 6, I prefer The Great Silence. I think that's the better film. But Django, again, inspired a lot of films. How many Django sequels have there been? Answers in the comments, because there's probably been about 16 to 22 maybe, something like that. It's got a great score. It's full of wonderful moments. Does it hang together as a film completely well? Not quite, but it is a seminal western. Next is Django Unchained by Tarantino. Again, about an hour too long, but there's some really good stuff in it. And Franco Nero even makes an appearance, because obviously Tarantino was a big Sergio Corbucci fan. Next is The Grand Duel, with Lee Van Cleef, of course. Just trying to remember. Yeah, Giancarlo Santi direct. It's a lot of fun. It's not perfect, it's a lot of fun. And this is the double Blu-ray of The Grand Duel and Keoma, another Franco Nero western, which is a bit of a mess, to be honest, but it has some great Franco Nero moments, but it's not great, I would say. Next, a couple of modern westerns. Can you believe it? This is Salvation, or The Salvation, with Mads Mikkelsen. It's It's a really beautifully mounted revenge thriller, western, but I would say it's solid. I wouldn't rush out and buy it. I would, however, rush out and buy Slow West, one of my favourite films of the last 20 years. Absolutely beautiful. Starring Michael Fassbender and Cody Smith McPhee as a Scottish boy who's come to the West to find his love. And he kind of hires Michael Fassbender to escort him across the country. I think it was shot in New Zealand, maybe. It's absolutely stunning. There's wonderful set pieces. Yes, there's violence, but at the end of the film we kind of see the effect of that violence in a quite moving way, quite a clever way. It's just such a great film. Again, it is quite slow because it's Slow West, but it's got a wonderful cast, beautifully shot, and again I would highly recommend you pick up. Again, it's one of those films you can pick up really cheaply on Blu-ray. Next is Once Upon a Time in the West. I don't really need to say anything about that. As far as I'm concerned, it's the greatest western ever made, and it's in the conversation for my favourite film of all time. Next, again, it's not a western, but it really is. It's Rango with Johnny Depp. Strange enough, also directed by Gore Verbinski. Who would have thought I would have two Gore Verbinski films on a list? It's a really fun animated film, starring Johnny Depp as a lizard who gets involved in a town's quest for water and the corruption of the mayor. It's a great wee film. Again, you can pick up for like £2 or something like that. Next, it's another Anthony Mann, Jimmy Stewart western, Winchester 73. I think this was the first one. Shelley Winters and Dan Deria again. This one, Jimmy Stewart's after the guy who stole his prize rifle. Again, simple story, but really executed well. Next is the aforementioned Great Silence, which again I just featured in my episode 6 of my favourite 150 films. Beautiful Sergio Corbucci film in the snow with a mute hero and one of the greatest endings of all time. Next, Gregory Peck and Richard Widmark in Yellow Sky, which is a great wee film about a bunch of crooks cross the desert and turn up on an abandoned mine that's not quite abandoned because there's two people there, grandfather and his granddaughter, strangely enough, and the unrest between the gang who want to do terrible things to the daughter and also smell gold. Great Richard Widmark performance as the lieutenant who's had enough of Gregory Peck being in charge. Again, doesn't hang about, directed by William Wellman. It's just a really nice constructed little western. Next is Peckinpah's Wild Bunch, which is hugely influential, a wonderful cast. William Holden, Ernest Borgnine, Robert Ryan, Edmund O'Brien, Warren Oates, Ben Jonson. It's got one of the greatest cinema walks in history. It's got a extremely famous ending. Yes, is it a bit overlong? Yeah, but you have to remember Peckinpah was probably drunk through most of it. Next is True Grit, or the closest I'll get to mention a John Wayne film. This is the Coen Brothers version of True Grit, which is really good, with Jeff Bridges, Matt Damon and Josh Brolin. And you might as well mention No Country for Old Men, which isn't a western, but it pretty much is a western, which is fantastic apart from one scene that really annoys me. Yeah, True Grit is really good, looks beautiful. It's got that kind of faded brown look to it, which is really nice. Don't worry, we're only about halfway through. Blazing Saddles, or a film that probably just wouldn't be made now. It's quite interesting when you think of the number of films that just wouldn't be made now. Yeah, we've all seen it, we've all laughed. Next, again, it's not a Western, but it is. It's Peter Hyam's Outland, or High Noon in Space with Sean Connery. The Blu-ray release is fantastic because now you can actually see what they spent the money on. Because when it was in television or in DVD, it was almost like pitch black for lots of scenes. Whereas in the Blu-ray, you can now actually see where they spent the money on the sets, and it's just beautiful. And it's a cracking little thriller. Next, again, not strictly a Western, but it's a Western. Bad Day at Black Rock, Spencer Tracy and Robert Ryan. Ernest Borgnine, and Lee Marvin. I mean, what a cast, Walter Brennan. Spencer Tracy comes to a western town to give a medal to a Japanese gentleman, and the town has secrets. Next, one of the few westerns in the Criterion Collection, 310 to Yuma, which is spy number 657. Directed by Delmer Davies, starring Glenn Ford and Van Heflin. It's actually got a pretty good remake with Russell Crowe and Christian Bale. It's perfectly acceptable. But this is, again, only 92 minutes. Westerns at their best, well, if you take away Sergio Leone, Westerns at their best generally are economical, get to where they're going. They're lean, mean shooting machines. Next is The Mercenary. Which is another Sergio Corbucci. Sorry, I was just double checking it. Sergio Corbucci. Part of the Italian collection, 88 films. Again, Corbucci is the tier below Sergio Leone. There's a lot of things to like about The Mercenary, but there's other things, it's just a bit messy, as quite a few Corbucci films are. They're not as sharp or lean as they need to be. Next is another Corbucci, Navajo Joe, with Burt Reynolds, which again is okay, but it's a bit of a mess. If you're a Burt Reynolds fan, it's well worth having. Next is a really surprising little film, A Man Alone by Ray Milland. Only surprising because it was directed by Ray Milland, or R. Milland. He also directed Panic in Year Zero, which I did a video on as well. It's a really good little western. Again, Raymond Burr's in it, Lee Van Cleef's in it, about a man who comes to town and gets involved with trouble. It's a really good little western. It's got audio commentary as well. It's Kino Lorber Blu-ray. I would highly recommend A Man Alone. Next, speaking of Lee Van Cleef, it's Barquero. I mean, Lee Van Cleef and War and Oates. Come on, fighting over a bridge. It's 115 minutes too. It's 115 minutes too long. That's harsh. It's probably about 15 minutes too long. Again, this is a Kino Lorber Region A, no extras, but it's a lot of fun. Kerwin Matthews is in it, or Sinbad as we like to know. Yeah, it's far from perfect, but it's a lot of fun on a Sunday afternoon. And the final Kino Lorber is another Anthony Mann. It's Bend of the River with Jimmy Stewart and Arthur Kennedy and Rock Hudson. Again, this is Jimmy Stewart, a little bit darker. Again, this one's got a commentary. We're back to 88 Films Italian collection with one of the Django sequels. This is Django Kill, If You Live, Shoot. Again, this has It stars Thomas Millian instead of Franco Nero. Again, there's some good stuff in it, but overall it's not the best. Next is Man of the West, another Anthony Mann, but this time Gary Cooper. I mean, I'm not the biggest Gary Cooper fan. I probably would have preferred if it was Jimmy Stewart. But it's really good. Lee J. Cobb is in it. But again, you feel if it was Jimmy Stewart, it probably would have been even better. Apologies to Gary Cooper fans, but Samuel Fuller, 40 Guns, Barbara Stanwyck. We'll mention another Western with women taking the power. Didn't happen very often, but this is a really good Sam Fuller. Next, one that I really like, Andre de Toth's Day of the Outlaw with Robert Ryan. It's just an awesome little Western. There's a great fight scene in it, which is really realistic. Again, this is Robert Ryan playing somebody who has a huge beef with another member of the town, but it's interrupted when a gang of outlaws come into town and they have to kind of band together. Robert Ryan in one of his best performances. That's the reverse artwork. It's just really good. I had never seen it until I actually bought the Eureka Masters of Cinema. It's a great wee film. Highly recommend that one. Next is High Noon, which is one of the more famous American westerns, but it's actually just okay. It's a good film, but it's not one of the greatest westerns ever made, in my opinion. Again, Gary Cooper's not the best. Still good. Next, it's Lee Van Cleef again. This is an Arrow, and this is Day of Anger by Tonino Valerieri. Again, not great, but it's a lot of fun, and any film with Lee Van Cleef is worth owning and watching. Next, it's another Anthony Mann, Jimmy Stewart. It's The Far Country. This is another great Jimmy Stewart performance. He plays a loner who, strangely enough, just wants to be left alone, and he gets involved in Alaskan trouble. Sorry, in Canada. That's almost Alaska. Involved in the Klondike with a corrupt town leader. It's just a great Jimmy Stewart performance. It's just a wonderful film. I would highly recommend the Jimmy Stewart Anthony Mann westerns if you haven't seen them already. Next is My Darling Clementine on Arrow Academy. This is the 2-disc special edition, which has a pre-release version, and it also has a copy of the Randolph Scott film Frontier Marshal from 1939, which again is about Wyatt Earp. That's just the standard cover that you get now, just on the standard release. Yes, it's a John Ford film, but John Wayne's not in it. Henry Fonda is just wonderful in it. The way he moves, the way he sits in a chair. The Shakespeare scene with Victor Mature is quite fantastic. It's shot economically. It's beautiful, crisp, black and white cinematography. Yeah, it's a fantastic film. Next is another fantastic little film. It's The Oxbow Incident with William Wellman with Henry Fonda. It's only 75 minutes long, but it's really economical. Henry Fonda gets involved. Him and Henry Morgan, the famous Henry Morgan, you might not recognise the name, but you recognise his face. They kind of get involved with a lynch mob who are going after some cattle thieves, who they think are Dana Andrews and Anthony Quinn, and they're determined to lynch them. It's shot mainly on sets, but it's kind of adds to the claustrophobia. It's a really wonderful little film. That's the alternate art. And again, it shows that even at 75 minutes you can tell a story really economically and effectively. A lesson that quite a few people could learn. Next is Ramrod by Andre de Toth as well. This is a nice little film too. Another great print. Next is Terror in a Texas Town, starring Sterling Hayden as a Swede with an accent that kind of comes and goes. And he has a big hook. It's a lot of fun though. It's more fun than it sounds. There's the alternate. I just like the sensational cover with Iron Hooked Fury. Next, a couple of DVDs. Again, this is directed by Jack Arnold, who's more famous for Shrinking People. This is The Man in the Shadow, starring Jeff Chandler, who's not great, and Orson Welles as the Heavy. It's an interesting little film, which I mainly got for Orson Welles, let's be honest. Next is another DVD, The Bounty Killer with Dan Duryea. Again, I think I did a random review of this a while ago. Again, another great Dan Duryea performance as he changes from being a naive guy to being a heartless killer. We've all done it. Next up is The Unbelievable Johnny Guitar, which is shot in the most Technicolor ever seen. It stars two women in the leading roles, Joan Crawford and Mercedes McCambridge, and Sterling Hayden pretty much plays the woman, Johnny Guitar, caught between the two of them. It's directed by Nicholas Ray. It's one of his greatest films. It's an odd western that wasn't understood at the time, but the French New Wave directors absolutely loved it. I think Mark Cousins once said, because I think it was possible on Moviedrome, Mark Cousins said, "Don't trust anybody that doesn't like Johnny Guitar." And I think that's good advice. Joan Crawford's just fantastic in it. Next is Shoot the Sun Down with Christopher Walken, Margaret Kidder and Geoffrey Lewis, which is a very strange western from the late 70s. Because Christopher Walken is not the man with no name, but again he kind of plays it in a really strange Christopher Walken type way. It's all about Mexican gold, or Montezuma's gold. It's obviously got a bit of El Topo about it. It kind of goes at its own pace. There's a lot to like about it, but it's also a little bit frustrating. But it's another wonderful Christopher Walken strange performance. Next is arguably the second best western ever made, The Good, the Bad and Ugly by Sergio Leone. Still the best relationship between men who would shoot each other in the back at a moment's notice if it served their purpose, but also have a real respect for each other and respect for each other's game, essentially. Got amazing set pieces. It's the fact that the main story doesn't start until like 40 minutes in. It's pretty much a template of how to do a long film but actually make it seem short. Again, another lesson that quite a lot of people could learn. It's just amazing. Another wonderful Ennio Morricone score. The Ecstasy of Gold and the trio are just amazing. It's one of those films I've probably seen way too many times. Next is Red Sun, which is a bizarre little western directed by Terence Young, starring Charles Bronson, Ursula Andress, Toshiro Mifune and Alain Delon. That sadly isn't quite as good as it sounds. It's still okay, it's solid, but probably should have been better than it is. It is a lot of fun though, but it should have been better. Next is another Tommy Lee Jones directed film called The Homesman, starring himself and Hilary Swank and Richard Jenkins. Sorry, John Lithgow. It's not Rich. It's a role Richard Jenkins would probably play, but it's John Lithgow. Again, it's a really nice little western which has a major shock about halfway through. I won't tell you what it is. Next, again, not a western, but pretty much a western, Hell or High Water, which is a really good film about two brothers who are broke and rob banks to try and save their farm. Jeff Bridges, close to retirement, trying to track them down. Beautifully shot. It does have a point to it, and one of the better modern films in the last 20 years, 10 years, 20 years. Next, the middle part of the Dollars trilogy, for a few dollars more. Again, better than A Fistful of Dollars, not quite as good as The Good, Bad and Ugly, but a lot of wonderful stuff in it. Lee Van Cleef, obviously Clint Eastwood, and Gian Maria Volonté. Again, it's got a wonderful set piece at the end involving watches. Yeah, it's not quite the Once Upon a Time in the West and Good, Bad and Ugly level, but it's still an excellent western. And we're coming up to the end. It's another Sergio Leone, A Fistful of Dynamite, or Docu-Sucker, or Once Upon a Time in a Revolution. Kind of the forgotten Sergio Leone film. This is the excellent Eureka release, starring Rod Steiger and James Coburn. And that's the American release, Docu-Sucker. Again, another wonderful Ennio Morricone score. Probably the most political of Sergio Leone's films. It's about, again, how poor people just get killed in revolutions, as usual. It's the poor get slaughtered. Rod Steiger, I would say he gives a subtle performance, but he doesn't give a subtle performance. He gives a Rod Steiger performance, but it is really good, and it's great to see it kind of in its proper form, or as proper as it can be. And finally, you'll be glad to know, Gunfight at the OK Corral with Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas. Not the best OK Corral film, that's still My Darling Clementine, but directed by John Sturges. It does have Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas. You can't ask for much more than that, can you? Yeah, probably a little too long, but still a lot of fun, and it's one of those Sunday afternoon westerns. So on that bombshell, I think that's all my westerns. I've probably forgotten a couple, but I'm not starting from scratch again, you'll be glad to know. So thanks very much for watching. Please leave comments below if you've made it to the end of the video, what your favourite westerns are and which westerns I should have, apart apart from the John Wayne ones. Only joking, but I'm not. And thanks very much for watching, and hopefully you'll join me again for more In the Frame videos. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films saying adios. Yes, as usual, I completely forgot my other backlog location, so I've just got a few more films just to mention. So you have Meek's Cutoff, which is a modern western. Heaven's Gate with Chris Christopherson and Michael Cimino's famous flop, but it's actually quite an interesting film. I need to rewatch that one. Hired Hand, Arrow Academy. Cemetery Without Crosses, Arrow Video. Franco Nero in Texas Adios, which is a kind of sequel to Django. A Pistol for Ringo and the Return of Ringo. And the Deadwood TV show, which I think I've only actually seen the first series of. So sorry for the amendment to the video, but this is me definitely showing all my westerns, I think. So once again, thanks very much for watching. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films saying adios again. Bye.